Broadcasting from the Symphony Studios in Marietta, Georgia, it's time for the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. Tune in every week as we spotlight the very best minds in our industry. Now here are your hosts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the 28th episode of the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. I am your host today, Katie Galley, and in the Symphony studio with me, I have innovation technology advocate with Larsen and Toubro, Tamer Reda. How you doing, Tamer?
Hello, how are you doing?
I am doing awesome. Thank you so much for taking
Election day, might I add.
What is it today?
On the eve of Election Day.
Yes, it is. It is the eve of Election Day. It's November. I can't believe it's already November. But
people will be seeing this on the other side.
They will. Yes. Your episode is going to air next Monday. So yeah, they'll be seeing on the other side, see what happens in the world in the next week.
See how foresightful we really are in our thoughts.
In our thoughts, yes. Yeah. Well, no matter what happens, this is going to be a bright spot in people's weeks because it's going to be an incredible conversation with you, Tamer, learning all about you and your own personal journey to date. So, Tamer, to get the ball rolling a little bit, can you share with us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got the job that you have today?
So I started off right out of school. I started doing medical sales and global medical sales. That time there was only fax machines. There was no internet. So we actually had to get out, send faxes, get on planes and go see people. So that's kind of how I started. I started really just traveling all over the place, understanding healthcare, understanding global markets, kind of seeing what's different in global markets, what's similar. And, that was there was no substitute for traveling. I think in a period of 6 years, I probably visited 70 countries and was on the road.
Wow.
80% of my life, I remember there was a period where I would say I never slept in the same bed 6 nights in a row for a 6-year period. I was always in a different part of the world.
Wow.
So that experience has been invaluable.
Yeah. So, I guess you have to like traveling just a little bit in order to be in that profession.
I did that. Yeah. It was great.
Yeah.
It was a different time, right? There was no social media. You actually really kind of had to go to shows, you had to meet people where you talked, you kind of had to, take data and, make your own analysis of what you thought the markets were doing, what people needed, how to establish your brand in the markets at that time. There wasn't any data. It was a lot of intuition.
Wow. And so, over time, like you're saying today with social media and the advent of that, learning how to brand yourself and knowing who you're talking to or just kind of the ease of putting things out there. So how long did it take you to develop that intuition specifically within your industry?
I would say I'm still developing it, Yeah. It's a learning process. But I think, everybody has different skill sets and the way their minds work. So I'm a very visual learner. I'm a very physical. So I learn by seeing people and markets and being out, and I kind of assess things. Some people learn more with the data. Some people learn more from reading. So there are different ways to absorb data, I guess, and information, and kind of inform your own intelligence. I think the one thing is that really helps me is to continue to look at the broader markets. So when I was in Southern Italy, I would kind of want to understand the Southern Italian market and how it was different than Northern Italy, but also understand how is the Italian market as a whole different than the German market, let's say, or the European market as a whole, or the global market, or the US market. What are the things that are common, but also what makes them different?
Yeah. And that makes sense. And to having the ability to travel to all these different places and learning all the differences, but too, I guess, the similarities between the different markets. So did that then lend to making maybe a templated model that you would, implement in different countries, different areas? How did you kind of go about developing that brand strategy in different areas?
That's a good question. I think it's always a little bit different, but I always looked at what are the common things, like what's common, because people tend to really get caught up in what's different, why their situation is so unique. And, you have to have empathy and a kind of an understanding, like, yes, there are things that are definitely different and their situation is different and there are things that make them unique and provide certain challenges to the market. But there are more things that are common, right? The one thing that's common is everybody has a unique problem. Like everybody's situation is unique. So it's not unique that everybody has a unique situation, but what are the common things that we can address and the broadest? And those are kind of very broad-based decisions that I'm always trying to calculate. And that's kind of really what allows people to become more strategic. Like, what are strategic directions that I can take? Because in the moment, everybody has a unique hurdle that they get very myopic around.
Wow.
But what's beyond that? Like, what's past this traffic jam, right? Because we're in a traffic jam, all we care about is like, when do we get it done? How many more? Like, when does this thing free up? How many more miles? But what's past it? Like, what happens when you get past that traffic jam?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what allows you, I think having that broad-based helps you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Tamer, for you then, I mean, starting with, where your journey began and where you ultimately ended up today as innovation technology advocate with Larsen and Toubro. How did you end up with Larsen and Toubro? What exactly do they do? And what do you do in your specific role?
So I help develop our IoT smart building strategies for North America, right? And how I got here is I spent 15 years at Johnson Controls building systems integration business, kind of coming up with, what are the different strategies to implement smart, intelligent infrastructure and how are these things kind of colliding, with each other. So when I came into Larsen & Toubro, they had a new product offering and they wanted me to help them develop a North American strategy. Like, what does the smart building space look like today? More importantly, what's it going to look like 5 years from now? And how do we enable growth in that market? And how do we develop products and offerings that help the business scale? And so that's how I kind of ended up here. And a lot of what I learned at Johnson Controls in the construction has really helped me understand how the buying behavior and the buying markets and who the economic buyers, who actually has money to buy.
And I bet too, drawing on your past experience and lends it to, with just technology in general. You're saying looking forward the next 5 years, the shifts and the changes that could happen, but being able to, I guess you can't really forecast and see exactly where things are going, but to try and kind of map it out and foresee where things could end up going. So drawing on your own experiences to help with that.
Yeah, I think we're in a unique situation. So much has happened and everybody's on like the next wave, like, how do I disrupt? Right? You hear all of these, like, I want to be the next disruptive. We want to be disruptive. Well, there's just disruptive and destructive. And one of the things that, when you look at markets cannot disrupt their own market. So what I'll give you an example is the cab industry could not disrupt itself. Uber disrupted the car industry, the cab industry. And every market is disrupted by an outsider. So when you look at like, where do we disrupt? A lot of markets, a lot of companies look inward in their own market. Like, how do we change our market? How do we disrupt our own market? You can't do that. You just inherently can't. So you have to look at what market can we disrupt that we have no venture, that we have no stake in.
Wow.
Right? Because most companies, like, I don't want to throw names, but if I'm a computer company and I want to disrupt my computer company, the computer industry, I don't want to disrupt my own channels. I'm going to cannibalize my own business before it may or may not work. And you can't do that because if it fails, you've just disrupted your own market.
Right.
So you have to look, what markets can we disrupt outside of the ones that we think we're in? Wow. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. So then, Tamer, how would you advise someone, looking outside of the market that you're currently in, where would you begin? Where would you think to look first?
So you'd look at, what can we do? So I always think the market's different, right? It's all the things that we've known historically is no longer is the enterprise our customer. Mm-hmm. Like, our customers are no longer the companies that we sell to. Our customer are the end users. And the end user has to be the consumer, right? Now, is this going to change? Not for the foreseeable future, because that's where all the money's going. So what consumers can I enable and provide value to quickly and simply, right? So if you look at like Netflix, for example, Netflix is a very simple model. Look at Zoom. We're on Zoom now, right? Zoom didn't exist a year ago. Zoom, it wasn't WebEx that tried to disrupt its own business, right? It was Zoom. Why did Zoom catch on early? They didn't go try to sell to, Larsen and Toubro or to IBMs or to these big companies. They went and sold to you and I directly. So you and I are using Zoom as a company directly, and we can do it within seconds. Right? I don't think they went out and tried to disrupt the video conferencing market for enterprises.
Right.
So those are kind of technologies that you got to go directly to the consumer, and you got to make it quickly and easily and affordable for them to provide.
Yeah. I mean, and that is interesting. I mean, it's kind of like thinking outside of the box, but not really at the same time. I mean, it seems like a logical step, but also, like you're saying, it's not one that, I don't know, I guess for some reason you wouldn't think to do initially.
Yeah, look, if Zoom went out and said to every company that uses video conferencing, we want you to install this server on your network data center, and we want you to pay for it, and we're going to come out and install it, and we need an IT resource to come do it, and it's going to be quickly. I don't think they'd have 100 million users in 6 months.
Yeah.
Right. So the fact that they were able to get to you and I directly and bypass the corporations we work for,
right,
made them highly successful.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So Tamer, with everything that you do with Larsen and Toubro as the innovation technology advocate, looking forward for you guys, what's on the horizon? What's coming up next?
I think we're kind of looking at the smart building space.
Yeah.
And what are the services that we can provide to the tenants of the buildings that make it easier for them to access the services in those buildings, right? Now, this has drastically changed. Buildings have always been around energy and reducing costs. Now, how do we give access to services to the employees of the buildings quickly? Was it to book conference rooms, control their own environment, provide better safety and security, but things that they can do directly? And then the other thing is, what can we do to the people that service the buildings? Like the elevator vendors, the fire alarm vendors, the security vendors, all of these facility companies, what can we do? What services can we give them to make it easier for them to serve their clients? Can we give them access to more data and more services that makes it easier and quicker and more proactive? So I think that's kind of where we're looking at. It's like, how do we disrupt that maintenance service business, where we see as the big one? That's really where all the money is.
Wow. It seems like a trend in your own life, and now, carrying into career, is disruption, trying to throw a wrench in everything, make things better.
Right. And it's how do you disrupt the industry? And I think everybody uses the term is disruption. It's always been innovative. Like, how do you innovate? So when we were in medical industry, let's say, 20 years ago, wireless and telemetry kind of really innovated the way that they gave service to patients, because no longer did you have to be tied to a wall to get something. You can make patients mobile, and you can extend services outside of the hospital. So now, how do you extend services in a building outside of the physical buildings?
Yeah.
To its employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tamer, so where your journey started in kind of the medical industry and now into smart buildings, making that transition across different industries, what initially, I guess, intrigued you about getting into that medical side and then ultimately making those shifts into smart building?
I think it's always kind of the innovative use of how to apply technology.
Okay.
And looking at, how do I connect the dots, right? Because everybody has their own little unique problem, but there's a common web, whether it's different country markets or different stakeholders within an organization. There's a common thread that if we can figure out how to use technology and solutions and foresight, how do I weave that thread to connect all of these seemingly disparate problems, unique problems that these individual stakeholders have? So whether I'm doing smart buildings or healthcare or entertainment or stadiums, airports, that's always been kind of the fascinating thing. So how do I connect those dots?
Yeah, bringing them all together, almost like, creating technology harmony, the name of our podcast. Crazy. Well, Tamer, if someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about your company, where might they do that?
They can reach me at tamer.redaltts.com.
Thank you all for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest and their company, check out the show notes for the relevant links. If you would like to learn more about us here at Symphony, of course, subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook at Symphony Technology Solutions and on Instagram at Symphony Tech Solutions. Here at Symphony, our ultimate goal is to make harmonious music out of all the technological noise. And we hope today's episode helped in doing just that. See you next time.